I'm going to talk to you about three things. The first one is health. The second one is humor. And the third one is humility. Can I put this down? Edward de Bono wrote a book. It was published actually in, I think it was about 2004. It was called H+, The New Religion. And Edward thought that he could start a new movement based on positive psychology rather than belief. Health, humor, and humanness were three of the elements, accompanied by something called happiness, hope, and help. So I've just picked three: health, humor, and humility. The first one, health. If anybody who knows me knows how much red wine I drink, I should not be talking on the subject of health. It is not my forte. So that what I'm about to talk about has got nothing to do with banting and vitamins. It's got everything actually to do with life. And I thought what I would do is share a story about health. The first story is about David, and it's really a tribute to parenting. David was 16 years of age, and he was riding his motorbike at speed, coming off an off-ramp in the United States. As he came off the off-ramp, he hit the central reservation with his front tire, and he shot off his motorbike, and he was stopped like a human rocket by an oncoming car. He ended up being in a coma for 6 weeks, and when he came out of the coma, he'd been put into a carbon dioxide tent, because if you know anything about being in a coma, not that many people that I know have been in one, your bones over-calcify, so you can't control the bone production, particularly of a 16-year-old young man. When he came out, he was in a wheelchair, and he was told by the doctors he would never walk again, he would never talk again, he would spend the rest of his life literally sitting on the sofa. But he had a mother, and his mother happened to be a mentor of mine. And his mother got David home from the hospital. She got him out of his wheelchair, she got him walking again, she got him talking again. And eventually, when David was 22, he moved into his own apartment. I know David quite well because I was his first flatmate. I flew to the United States, and I can remember a lot of people telling me I was out of my mind at the time, and possibly that's true. But I flew to the United States, and I shared an apartment with David for 6 months just outside Chicago. So here I am, as sort of this, I think I was probably about 25 at the time, the sort of young, I have an ambition kind of kid. And I am sharing an apartment with a severely head-injured young man. What you couldn't tell by looking at David was that he was head-injured. You didn't actually know it. He was a very handsome young man. But he had some physical limitations. He couldn't lift his left arm, and he couldn't bend his right arm. So he somehow found a way to eat by swinging his one arm and using his bent arm to lift the other one. He couldn't do something as simple as tie his shoelaces, so he found a way to twist his laces into like a loop and then push them into his shoes, so he was okay. Yeah. And what I discovered about health with David is that you don't necessarily appreciate the power of the human mind until you know what you can't do when it's gone. I think the person that got David, eventually he also got married. And you almost couldn't conceive this. Is that a man? Hello? That's so funny. Welcome. I just got a shock. It was like everyone's a woman. What was amazing, it was just the parenting and the maternal instinct that kicked in when I saw how Dee Dee actually got David to experience as much in his life as he possibly could. So your physical and mental attributes are something that we forget to be grateful for. So when I think of health, I think of your mind, I think of your body, and I think of your spirit. On the physical plane, and it's again a story about a mother, and this one is about Matthew. And ironically, Matthew was a little bit older than David. He was 25. He was an absolute wild child. Has anybody had a wild child? When Matthew was 7, they actually did medical studies on him because he was considered the first proper diagnosis of an ADHD kid in South Africa. He was off the charts. They put him behind one-way glass and they said it's impossible. He's got like 10 times more energy than any other kid in the room. But Matt was a bit older when his accident happened, and he was sitting in the back of a friend's car on his way out, and for once in his life he was sober. And it was a drunk driver that decided to change lanes on Rivonia Road in Johannesburg, flew into the back of the car, and being 6'4" and sitting in the back of a Golf, the roof of the car caved in, and in an instant, Matthew's neck was broken. Matt was a quadriplegic. He couldn't move, and he never had a drink again. But what was absolutely remarkable about Matt was he never ever once bore a grudge against the person that drove into the back of him. Again, it was parenting that took care of him for 13 years before, as many quadriplegics do, he eventually passed away. Just before his 40th birthday. But what I wanted to share with you when it came to health was that health isn't necessarily just about the food that we eat, the pieces of stuff that we put inside ourselves. It's also the gratitude that we need to have for the fact that we have our physical being and we have our mental health, and everything else I think you can pretty much take care of. So that's a little bit of a tribute to Dee Dee, 2 very, very strong women, and Megan, who was David's mother and Matthew's mother. And that's all I'm going to say on the subject of health. For the rest, I'm going to carry on drinking wine. So then I wanted to talk about humor. Now, I love laughing. And I think one of the best political lines I've ever heard was Hillary Clinton when she said, "Don't take yourself so seriously." I thought, I don't know if that was pre or post-election, but she said, "Don't take yourself so seriously." And humor, ironically, I think is an attitude, and I think sometimes we do take ourselves very seriously. But actually life, through the lens of laughter, can be enjoyed a whole deal more than through the lens of misery. And the first time I realized that life was better if it was funny was when I was 17 years of age. And I was the first child in the history of my school to fail every single subject. So if you're a parent of a 17-year-old child, there's hope. I don't think that was one of the H's that Edward spoke about. But I sat in this class. The class was actually called Lower 6Y. And I used to think that the teachers called it Lower 6Y. Because they probably looked at me and thought, why did we end up with the kid in this school? Because it wasn't once that I failed everything, it was twice. So I sat there looking around the school in this room of 23 kids. We were like the rejects. And I was the worst of that class, by the way. So everyone else was smarter than me at this point. And I remember looking around thinking, I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be like her. I definitely don't want to be like her. And at that point, I thought it was better to be funny than stupid. So I decided to build on my sense of humor, and that has literally carried me through my life for the rest of my days. But what was hysterical is that at school, I never really... Did anyone go to school? I mean, I know you went to school, but did anyone go to school? Go, wow, this is amazing. This is a really cool experience. I didn't. It was torture. The school bus for me was like suffering all the way. But when we got to school, I used to be fascinated that they would give us this book called Macbeth. Did anyone do Shakespeare? Everyone did? Okay, fine. We had to study Macbeth to death. There was a TV series on Macbeth. We had to read the original, it wasn't the original manuscript, but a printed version of the manuscript. And because I grew up in the UK, I couldn't believe this. This was like death. We had to go and watch the Shakespeare play at Stratford-upon-Avon. I've never forgotten this year because it was the first year that the study guides came out on the same damn book. I thought, enough already. We got it. There was a bit of blood going on. There's an unhappy wife. It's all very sad. Let's move on to the next one, can we? And they weren't happy enough with that. They said, you have to study this for the whole year. And at the end of the year, we are going to sit you in a room with your friends, just so far away from each other that you cannot see what your friends are typing or writing. Do you remember those days? It's called an exam. Yeah. Now, I couldn't get my head around an exam because I was so unhappy at school, I'd learned to copy all my friends' work on the school bus. So it's like, can't I just ask you what the answer is and I'll just write it down? Apparently silence was the order of the day. It's never been my long suit. So they sit us in this room and they tell us to write down what we've just learned about Macbeth. Now, I had a question, and my English teacher at the time was called Miss Pierce. And I wasn't just the dumbest kid in the school, I was also the smallest kid in the school. I had to get permission to wear another school uniform, a uniform from another school because I was too little for all the... Can you believe it? Look at me now. Oh my God. So Miss Pierce was our teacher, and she gave us this exam, and we had to sit there almost blindfolded and completely mute and tell her exactly what we'd just read. So I decided to ask Miss Pierce a different question. I'm like, Miss Pierce, how I didn't get expelled, I'll never know. Miss Pierce, have you read Macbeth? Yes, Nicola. Miss Pierce, how many times have you read Macbeth? Many times, Nicola. I've been teaching this for years. I can see that. I said, so you probably know what's in the book, right? Yes, Nicola. So I said, then why do you want me to tell you what you already know? It's a true story. It didn't go down well. What I discovered was that in England at the time, the Cambridge examination system had pass, and the pass rate was A, B, and C. So if you got an A, a B, or a C, you were considered a pass. If you got a D and E, you were considered a fail. Amazing. I think South Africa's a bit different. I think he's still a pass, right? I passed school, I mean, hey. That's why I moved to South Africa. I'm an A student here. But what I discovered was that there was a whole new classification in the exam rates, and that was called a U. A U stood for unclassified. What that basically meant is even if you could write backwards for fun, it wasn't appreciated. Because it meant that even if you didn't spell your name, or you couldn't spell your name, you'd get a U. But in England, of course, they're so classist. Has anyone been to England? Yeah, you've got the upper class, the middle upper class, the lower upper class, the upper middle class, the middle class, the lower middle class. You've got the upper lower class, the middle lower class, the lower class, and then you've got you. Because you've got U1 and U2. Can you believe it? U2 was the lowest possible grade you could get in an English examination, a Cambridge examination in the UK. And I know because I got 2 of them. One of them was for English literature. And I actually left school having never taken or passed English literature. I did pass English language, the onomatopoeia, comma, full stop, all that stuff. But English literature I never got because I bartered with my teacher. I said, if you want me to tell you what's in The Horse and Hound, I will. I bet you don't know what that is. But if you want me to read Far from the Madding Crowd, my family is a bit like the madding crowd. I won't be doing that. Thank you very much. So they let me go in the end. In fact, the last 4 words I got from school were, you can go now. So I discovered, thankfully they didn't expel me because I think they kept me for entertainment purposes. But I discovered that having a sense of humor can actually get you through life. And the tribute that I want to give, because this is a women's breakfast, the person that most deserves acknowledgement for my failing of school is my mom. My mom. These are all very important people in my life that I'm mentioning. And my mom never told me that I failed. Isn't that amazing? And the true story attached to that absolute disaster, for the school more than for the family, was the fact that I remember getting a piece of paper through the post. If you ever remember exam results, they weren't digital when I was a kid. It came on a piece of paper printed on a dot matrix printer. And it was like carbonated, and you had to split it apart, and it was about 3 inches by 5 inches, and it just had these lines on it and these letters next to them. I got the piece of paper, and I thought, there's a lovely word in Afrikaans, so forgive me if it offends anybody, oorkak, right? And so I get the piece of paper, and I go into the bathroom, and this is a true story, and I sit on the loo with the lid down. And I said, and my mom's standing outside the door, and she said, how did you do? So I'm like, not so great. She said, no, come on, love, how did you do? I said, no, Nick, how did you do? Now, my mom's like 5 feet tall. She's tiny. And I thought, she's got to have an angry voice. Every mom has got an angry voice, right? I thought, it's going to come now. I said, Mom, I failed all of them. She said, no, don't be ridiculous. I said, no, I did. She said, no, you're crazy. No, I don't believe you. I said, Mom, I failed them all. She said, no. And I'm like, angry voice coming. So I take the piece of paper and I slip it under the toilet door. I can hear my mom bending down, picking it up. And the phone, I can remember the house like it was yesterday. And she went, oh. Come out. I'm like, angry voice, angry hand, what's coming? She said, no, come out. So I come out of the loo, literally, sheepishly, I put my head round, and she said, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Isn't that amazing? You'll be fine. And you know what? I'm fine. I got a few quirks, but I'm fine. So far the tribute is to Dee Dee, David's mom, Megan, Matthew's mom, and my mom. And the last one I wanted to talk about was humility. Now, humility for me is a very interesting thing because it's something we value, but we can't always see. It's something we feel, but we don't always know how to do it. I've got a few people in my life who are into sort of, spooks. It's like they go and get the cards read, or they're shawar, those shawar people. And what I've learned is that anybody that tells you they're enlightened isn't. Because the truly enlightened people don't talk about it. They just are. I wrote a book once on my Palm 5. Does anyone remember Palm 5s? I'm showing my age now. And I called it It. I never published it like most things that I write. But I said, you've either got it or you haven't got it. You either get it or you don't get it. If you've got it, you can't give it. If someone's got it, you know that they have it. But it is not something you can teach or learn. It is something that you have to get for yourself. So what is it? And I think the closest thing to describe it is humility. And the minute you have it, you don't have it. You know what I mean? It's the paradox of it. Because it's almost like the opposite of humility is ego. And I always say you need ego to enter the race, but you need humility when you win it. Because no one likes an arrogant winner. You can't do what I'm doing today and say, I don't have an ego. Do me a favor. It's enormous. I had to buy an X5 once to transport it around Johannesburg. It's a true story. I thought it was the best car in the world. I could have my makeup bag, my breakfast. I mean, I could virtually have a party in the console between me and the passenger seat. And I've never forgotten rocking up at a client's meeting in Joburg, and Ian walked out. He said, I'll walk you to your car. So we walked out to my car, and he saw me getting into this X5, and he started laughing. I'm like, what's so funny? Look at the width of my tires. So he said, Nick, it looks like you've stolen your dad's car. And then I realized not even my ego was as big as an X5, and I got rid of it. Now I drive a Honda Jazz. It's a true story, and I don't care. So the strange thing about ego and humility is it's almost as if we get it as we get older. And when I was researching this, I was thinking, as we get older, what happens to us? And I said to Kirsty, my business partner sitting here in the front, I said to Kirsty the other day, I said, I am fatter than I have ever been in my entire life. I am heavier. And even Trish said, you don't look any bigger. It's like, I am. I can't believe it. I got on the scale. I'm like, there's a 0 and another number, and I'm like, it can't be happening to me. And it just happened. So I did some research into maybe my skeleton will get lighter as I get older. And I don't have to try so hard. The number's just going to go down. And then I read the worst, because I know, so in researching this, I thought, well, let me find out about our eggs. You know, it's a bit of a fallacy that you're born with all your eggs. You know that. Do you know that? Yeah. So there's some theories that we think that little girls are born with all their eggs. You're not. You're born with a whole bunch of things that make eggs. And what's scary is that before puberty, most of them disappear. You then can lose like 3,000 eggs a month. I thought it was like 1 or 2. 3,000 a month of these buggers are disappearing. And then eventually, you run out of eggs. But you don't run out of eggs, you run out of the things that can make them. I was like, right. And then I read the next piece, which is not what I wanted to hear, but was kind of insightful in terms of my future diet. I then discovered that after the age of 40, as women, we start to lose our bone mass. Did you know that? And it's not because our bones disappear, it's because we can't absorb calcium at the rate that we used to. When you run out of eggs, or the things that make them, your bone mass can reduce between 2 and 3% per year for a period of 5 years. If you live to your 90, your skeleton can be 50% of its original mass, which means that unlike chimpanzees, we're more prone to osteoporosis and breakages and things like that. So I discovered in my research, as I'm getting older and feeling vaguely more humble, that even if I can't lose the weight that I gained today, if I live till I'm 90, there's a good chance I'm going to be lighter. So ego is a wonderful thing. Don't be ashamed of it. In fact, love it, embrace it. Ego is something we can see in others, but we can rarely see in ourselves. But as women, we've often been taught that it's a bad thing, that you must put a lid on your ego, that you can't actually put it on display. But if you want to buy an X5 or steal your dad's car, I give you full permission to go ahead and do that, because actually it was quite fun. And if you want to drive a Honda Jazz, that's fine too. So I could go on forever, because that's what I do for a living, I speak. But if I just recap quickly, health. That's the number one priority in our lives. And as a parent, I'm sure many of you are parents, I'm not a parent, but as parents to the children in this world, I think that's probably the biggest contribution that we make. The second thing is humor. Don't be afraid to have one. I think it's certainly been my saving grace. And I think, remember what Hillary Clinton said, don't take yourself so seriously. And then the third one is humility. I actually think, naturally, that women have humility, that it's something that we get that lots of other people don't necessarily understand, and I applaud you all for that. And I wanted to leave you with a favorite, it's a couple of lines from one of my favorite poems, and I'm not a big poet, as you can imagine. What's on top of my list of things to read. In fact, now I'm thinking of it, I remember my dyslexia test at school was Miss Northend pulling me into her office one day and saying, your mother tells me you're dyslexic. I think my mother hoped I was dyslexic. But she discovered that I wasn't. That was my mom's biggest disappointment. It's like, oh, there's not a problem I can label this on. It's like, no, that's me. Anyway, I read Science Today, and she said, tell your mother to stop wasting my time. That was the end of my dyslexia test. So just to prove I'm not dyslexic, I thought I'd read this piece to you. And some of you may know it, but it's one of my most favorite pieces, and I think it speaks to the heart of every single woman. And it's written by Araya Mountain Dreamer, and you know it. So let's just go through it one more time, and let's have some eggs for breakfast before you run out. It says, it doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, and for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets square your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it, or fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, and if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes, without cautioning us to be careful, realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty when it is not pretty every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Thank you.